And in this video, we hear from the firearms expert who discusses in court the murder of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe.
Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. There were fragments of plastic cartridge wadding present and several pellets in various areas of the front of the vehicle. He spoke of the gunshot wounds to each of the passengers, saying those to Tucker were at close range from 18 inches to 2'6". The cartridge cases all came from 7 12-bore Vantage cartridges with a loading of 7.5 lead shot. Then importantly, he examined the firing marks on all of those cartridges microscopically and was satisfied that all 7 were fired using the same firearm, which he said was almost certainly a pump-action or self-loading 12-bore shotgun. The wads and pieces of wadding were derived from 7 plastic wads of the type that is loaded into 12-bore Vantage shotgun cartridges and thus could have emanated from those 7 cases. The sample of hair from Tate, the backseat passenger, indicated that the shot which caused the injury to his head, the actual injury, had actually passed through glass prior to causing the injury. The only broken glass was of course on the near side. Right, so let's just jump in here quickly because that is worded quite clumsily, to be honest. But what they're trying to say here is that the firearms expert took a look at the scene and he is convinced that only 1 gun fired the shots which killed Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. Not 2 guns, but 1 gun which killed these individuals. And then he goes on to talk about the sample of Tate's hair. Now what they're talking about here is that there is glass in Tate's hair. We know that there's a broken window on the rear near side. Now, some people often get confused with this, like, you know, the gunshot went from the offside to the near side and smashed the window out that way, but that's not what's taken place here. In my opinion, what's happened is that a series of shots have been fired to incapacitate these individuals. The gunman has then calmly walked around the front of the vehicle towards the near side, where Tate is now huddled up in the corner. He's taken aim from some distance, fired, that shot has grazed the top of Tate's head, it smashed the window, and then the gunman has then calmly walked forward and shot him at point blank range. Now where this gets a little bit more interesting is when we combine the findings of the firearms expert compared to that of the testimony put forward by Darren Nichols. Now this is from his statement under oath, and he's talking about what happened after these murders had taken place. He's just picked Mick and Jack up, they're in the vehicle, and there's some discussion about what has just taken place. There was some conversation in the car with Mr. Steele. He said Jack was very cold-hearted. I said, why? He first of all said when they'd stopped down the lane, a gate had been shut, so I got out of the Range Rover and I didn't know where Jack was. Then Jack went into the Range Rover and shot all 3 of them. Jack handed Mick a gun and Mick shot them. Then he said that once that happened, Jack reloaded his gun and shot them all in the back of the head. I can't recall anything else that was said. Also mentioned in that same statement is the following. I pulled out in front of a car. Mick asked if I was okay. I said yes I was, and as we drove up the road towards the turnpike, Mick said they won't mess with us no more. And Jack said, yeah, it was quite funny, because when Mick had shot one of them, the gun fell apart. He kept asking me if I was okay several times. I realised what had happened, but not to who. So interestingly there, he mentions that Mick had shot one of them and the gun fell apart. He's not saying that he tried to shoot someone and the gun fell apart immediately. He's saying that Mick had shot one of them and then the gun fell apart. And then he's also talking about Jack Wombs passing a gun to Michael Steele. Michael Steele shooting these individuals, and then Jack with his own gun firing separate shots. But this would be impossible according to the firearms expert. According to his testimony, only one weapon fired the shots that evening. He concluded that 8 shots from a 12-bore shotgun appeared to have been fired at the scene. 2 into the right-hand side of Tucker, the front passenger, 1 into the back of his head, 2 into the right side of the head and face of Rolfe, the driver, and 3 at the rear passenger Tate, 1 into the right torso, 1 across the back of the head, and 1 into the left side of his head. He thought that most of the shots appeared to have been fired from close range through the open rear offside door of the vehicle. One of the shots to the head and face of Rolfe having first passed through the right-hand corner of the driver's headrest, as you can see in the photograph. The shot fired across the head of Tate appeared to have passed through the glass on the rear near side door. The shot into his head appeared to be fired from the near side of the vehicle through the same glass. The angle of the shot into his right torso suggested that he was in a position similar to where he was found when the shot was fired. So that's actually quite an interesting point to note there before we continue on, is the position of Tate when he received that shot to the torso. Because I think a lot of people imagine that that shot was fired probably first or second after the shot to Rolfe, but already it appears that Tate was making his way towards the near side of the vehicle. As many of you will know, he's kind of found in a fetal position, I guess you would describe it, in the near side of the vehicle, the rear near side, sort of curled up towards the window with his head leaning on the window almost. And it's interesting there that he was in that position when he received the shot to the torso, or a very similar position. So he had, I guess, the presence of mind to immediately after the first shot hustle over or hurry over to that left side, the near side of the vehicle, before receiving that shot to the torso. Quite interesting there. Let's continue from where we left off. All 7 cartridge cases had been fired using the same weapon, probably a pump or self-loading gun having a large capacity magazine. He could not discount the use of a gun with a lesser magazine capacity. That would have required reloading. The likelihood of a large capacity magazine and the appearance of the fired wads suggested the use of a gun with a full-length barrel. It was not possible to state with any certainty what order the shots were fired in, but then he made an assumption. Not particularly scientific, you may think, and he said that later. It was a reasonable assumption that one shot was fired at each victim in turn before the other shots were fired. He said from the relaxed positions of the deceased 3, it appeared to have happened very rapidly. There was not time for special movement or something to move them from their comfortable positions. Then he moved on to tell you about how a shotgun is fired. He said a shotgun cartridge is fired by the bottom half-inch of the cartridge containing the propellant and the base being fitted with a primer in the centre which was of soft metal. If the primer was struck a very sharp blow, the chemicals ignite and those chemicals in the primer ignite the main propellant. It is the firing pin that causes the sharp blow. Different weapons leave different marks. The pump action has a single barrel with a magazine below it. The mechanism of an ordinary shotgun, as opposed to a self-loading or pump, was that you loaded a cartridge from a magazine into the chamber by pulling to the rear and then back to the front. The self-loading was very similar, but this time with a tubular magazine. He said in this case of a self-loading gun or a pump gun, the energy from the discharge was used to transfer the cartridge into the chamber. One was ejected and one was transferred. As to the ejection of a cartridge in each case, he said for a pump action you get quite a variable distance. That is a variable distance on how far the ejected case is thrown. The longest being between 5 and 6 feet, but sometimes the cartridge would just drop out of the gun. In the self-loading gun there would be a little difference, but there is a tendency for the cartridges to eject somewhat further. As to the damage to Tate's head, he said he thought the offside shot struck Tate's head first before striking the window. But the other near-side shot into the head was fired through some glass in the window. Okay, so I'm just going to cut in here briefly as there appears to be a little bit of a disagreement here. This guy is saying that the shot to Tate's head, the damage to Tate's head, he said he thought the offside shot struck Tate's head first before striking the window. So bearing in mind that offside is the driver's side of the vehicle. And really, I'm only looking for the shot to the torso coming from the offside of the vehicle. But this guy is saying that he believes that the offside shot to Tate's head, I guess the one that skims his head, actually comes from the offside of the vehicle, not the near side as I spoke about earlier. We're going to address this in the next episode of this series, but let's just carry on for the moment from where we left off. He then moved on to talk about the shotgun found at Meadow Cottage, Exhibit 103. He said that this was a Mossberg New Haven 600, a 12-bore pump-action shotgun in working order subject to the requirements of Section 1 of the Firearms Act 1968. Cross-examined by Mr. Parkins, Mr. Burns said this. He agreed that a defence expert, a doctor at Remshaw, was experienced in the field of firearms and had attended at Mr. Burns' laboratory on the 19th of August 1997, being afforded all facilities there. And there was nothing between the two experts except for one or two details. Mr. Burns said that whoever carried out the killing, it was a reasonable assumption that they were very well versed in the use of such a shotgun. It happened very quickly. Probably so quickly that the two in the front did not have time to appreciate what was going on. The suggestion he had made that each deceased received a disabling shot before the other shot was his opinion based on the findings of the scene. There would be a very loud noise and a total of 8 shots. He would have expected a rapid succession, and anyone hearing the shots would hear a quick succession of discharges. They could be heard for a distance certainly greater than a mile. Whether someone could hear any whimpering would also depend on how quickly the shots came. There would be a gap between the shots. Okay, so I'll just interject here very briefly. There's a couple of interesting points there which have been raised by Mr. Burns. He talks about the gunshots being audible for up to a mile away, or even just beyond a mile in distance. So anyone within that proximity may well have heard the shots on the evening of December the 6th. He also talks about what that would have sounded like to anybody who would have heard the gunshots. And I think this is something that I've tried to get across in previous videos. The way that this crime has been committed, at least in my opinion, is that we would have had 3 shots fired in very quick succession. And then there would have been a pause. And then there would have been further shots as the kill shots were then fired. It wouldn't just be this, gun-toting bloody maniac, firing as quickly as he can, bullets everywhere, cartridges everywhere, whatever, clicking the trigger as fast as he can. It's not like that. That's not what we're looking for. What you're looking for is 2 or 3 shots fired in very quick succession, easy for me to say, followed by a pause and then other shots. So with that in mind, let's take a look at 2 of the most common statements regarding people hearing shots on the evening of December the 6th. The following police statement is from Stephen Rogers, dated the 13th of December 1995. I live at 9 acres Rettendon Common, Essex. I would describe my home as a detached dwelling with 3/4 of an acre of land containing 4 stables. We are in a valley surrounded by fields, situated to the west of the A130 and west of the Wheatsheaf Public House. At this time there are 3 horses and a foal in our stables. The foal is being weaned off of its mother and therefore requires to be fed at all times of the day and night. I can say that it is not uncommon to hear gunshots during the day and early evening in this area, although I am not a shooting person and I do not possess a gun. During the evening of Wednesday the 6th of the 12th, 95, I was working in our village hall and I finished at the hall at 22:45 hours, returning home by 2300. I then had a sandwich and 2 cans of beer before going out to the stable to feed the foal. I would estimate the time to be 23:45. I have to mix the food, feed the animal and wait for the foal to finish, which normally takes about half an hour. On this occasion I had given the foal some food and given some attention to the other horses. I would estimate the time to be about midnight or a few minutes later. I was standing outside the stable when I heard a series of gunshots. These shots, I believe, came from a southerly direction. I walked to the fence at the rear of the stables, trying to see where these shots could have come from. I saw nothing. Although it was cold and very late, if I'd just heard 2 shots I wouldn't have taken much notice. I would have thought it was someone shooting rabbits. The gunshots I heard were more than 2 in number. They were of rapid fire, a fusillade of shots. There was no pause to reload in between these shots, they were rapid in succession. I couldn't say how many shots there were. I heard 2 shots, I expected the noise to stop, but it just continued. After these shots I didn't hear anything else. I remained out at the stables for about 10 more minutes before returning to my home. As I walked inside, in the light of my hallway, I checked my wristwatch. The time was now past midnight. I didn't think anything more about these gunshots until I heard people shooting in the area over the weekend. This prompted me to remember the unusual noise I had heard on Wednesday night, and I reported the matter to the police. Okay, now, this statement, to me, personally, doesn't sound like what we're looking for here. Yes, it does tie in with the Billy Jasper theory, quite loosely, but the way that this guy is actually describing hearing those shots or hearing that gunfire, to me just doesn't ring true in terms of what we're looking at regarding the execution of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. He mentions the following. Although it was cold and it was very late, if I had just heard 2 shots, I wouldn't have taken much notice. I would have thought it was someone out shooting rabbits. The gunshots I heard were more than 2 in number. They were of a rapid fire, a fusillade of shots. There was no pause to reload in between these shots. They were rapid in succession. I couldn't say how many shots there were. So, for me, this guy is explaining a lot of gunfire. He's not just hearing 3 quick shots and then a pause and then loads more shooting. Even he says here, I heard 2 shots, I expected the noise to stop, but it just continued. I mean, can we really even discredit the possibility that someone's actually turned up close to the scene or close to Workhouse Lane or somewhere in the vicinity and just fired off a load of shots to kind of not confuse people, but confuse the investigation? Can we really say that that's beyond the realms of possibility? Especially if the vehicle hadn't been discovered, why not just turn up somewhere close by, fire off a load of shots? Because when you think about it, people should remember those shots at around midnight because it was uncommon. It was common, however, for shots to be heard up until around 6:30, 7 o'clock-ish. That was quite common on a Wednesday in Rettendon, but certainly not at around midnight. So if you did want to confuse the investigation a little bit, or muddy the waters, whatever you want to say, then why not fire off a series of shots at around midnight to do exactly that? The following police statement is from Michael Strelly-Upton, dated the 10th of December 1995. I own and run Lappage's farm situated at Rettendon Common, East Hanningfield Road. The farm is situated off the A130 main road. As part of my work, I deal with animals, and around 6 times a week, I have cause to leave my farm and go to collect animal food. The place I go to collect the animal food is North Woodham Bakeries, and I leave at around 19:30 to 19:45 hours. On Wednesday, the 6th of December, I had to again go to North Woodham Bakeries to collect food for the animals. I recall having my evening meal that day around 1900 hours, and after that I sorted out my vehicle to go and collect the food. I left in my Land Rover, index number CA27UKV, and went via a petrol station to fuel the vehicle and then onto North Woodham. The journey normally takes me around 20 minutes. However, on this occasion it took longer due to getting fuel and being delayed at the bakeries. However, I recall returning home to the farm around 2100 hours to 21:30, the exact time I cannot remember. It was around this time, whilst I was unloading the Land Rover, that I heard the sound of a rapid burst of gunfire coming from the area of Workhouse Lane. I was quite used to hearing the sound of gunfire coming from this area on Wednesdays, as this is the day that there are shoots in the fields and surrounding area. However, I was quite surprised to hear the shots so late at night. I would describe the sound as either 2 or 3 shots being fired very closely together. Although I believe I heard the shots being fired at around 2100 to 2130 hours when I had returned from the bakeries, it may have happened just before I left, at around 1930 to 1945 hours. I am able to remember this incident so well as it was unusual to hear gunshots so late in the day. The shoots that occur on Wednesdays is clay pigeon shooting and runs the entire day until it gets dark. Okay, now this statement also has its own pros and cons, shall we say. What I find quite interesting about Mr. Streliapton's statement here is that he's clearly well versed in the area. He knows that shooting takes place on a Wednesday. He knows it takes place down Workhouse Lane or near Workhouse Lane. And interestingly there, he said he hears the gunfire from the area of Workhouse Lane or coming from the area of Workhouse Lane. He also mentions that Wednesdays is clay pigeon shooting and it normally runs the entire day until it gets dark. So this is someone who lives nearby. This is someone who is very, very familiar with the normal comings and goings of your average Wednesday. Now, where there is some confusion, however, comes in the form of the timeline. He says, although I believe I heard the shots being fired at around 2100 to 2130 hours when I returned from the bakeries, it may have happened just before I left, around 1930 to 1945. So clearly, this guy is confused in terms of when he heard the shots. And I think that's to be expected, actually. This is what I've been trying to get across to people, viewers of this channel. When you live in an area with a sound that happens every specific day of the week, like Wednesday, there's a gun shoot at Workhouse Lane. These gunshots are not out of the ordinary. People don't remember them because it's commonplace. It happens all the time, every Wednesday, up until a certain time, and then if you were to hear them, say at around midnight, then yes, that may well have stood out. But interestingly here, he seems a little bit confused as to what time he heard the shots. Now, could it even be that he's wrong when he says 1930 to 1945 hours? Could it have been even earlier, say 7 p.m, 1900 hours? Is that a possibility? Now, where I believe Mr. Streliapton's statement actually gains in credibility, however, is when he describes what he actually hears. And not just what he hears, but where this sound is coming from. He states the following. It was around this time, whilst I was unloading the Land Rover, that I heard the sound of a rapid burst of gunfire coming from the area of Workhouse Lane. I was quite used to hearing gunfire coming from this area on Wednesdays, as this is a day that there are shoots in the fields and surrounding area. I would describe the sound as either 2 or 3 shots being fired very closely together. Although I believe I heard the shots, and then he goes on to talk about the timing. But the fact he says that, I would describe the sound as either 2 or 3 shots being fired very closely together. That is exactly what we're looking for in terms of the killer, the perpetrator, the person who is committing this murder. Because in my mind, you would have, as Mr. Burns has stated, in a summing up in court, we have these 3 shots to incapacitate the individuals. And then things seem to slow down a little bit because the killer's got time to walk around the front of the Range Rover, take aim, shoot these individuals in the back of the head. This would have all taken, additional seconds. So it wouldn't have just been 8 shots fired with rapid succession, So the way he describes that there, to me, actually sounds quite credible.